TELUS Health gives a shout out to all the part-time chefs, jugglers, party planners, and caregivers. And when you need a hand, our convenient app has pharmacists available via video or phone, providing personalized consultations and free home delivery of pre-sorted medication. Because we know that taking care of them and yourself is a full-time job. TELUS Health Virtual Pharmacy. Download the app or visit us online today.
Welcome to Talent Canada's virtual roundtable discussing employee benefits for the hybrid workplace. I'm Marcel Vander, the editor of Talent Canada. Joining us for today's roundtable session are Jason Kennedy, the general manager of TELUS Health Virtual Pharmacy in Toronto, Brittany Taylor, partner at Rudner Law in Markham, Ontario, Norm Sabapathy, executive vice president of people at Cadillac, Fairview in Toronto, and Crystal Williams, CHRO at FleetCor in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome to each of you, and thanks for being a part of this conversation. The past 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic have been long and difficult. After much reflection, workplaces are beginning to piece together the future, and the way forward appears to be in a hybrid format. While leaders rethink physical workplaces, this roundtable session will focus on reimagining employee benefits for that hybrid workplace. Today, we will be discussing virtual healthcare advancements through COVID-19, new benefits considerations for remote staff, communication strategies promoting the value of benefits plans, and legal advice in regards to potential employment contract changes. With all of that said, let's begin. As I've shared, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to wreak havoc on the world of work as we previously knew it. But a bright spot for many has been the advancement of virtual health opportunities. Jason, can you describe the changes employers and employees have experienced in the virtual health space from where we were in March 2020 to where we are now?
Thanks, Marcel. Happy to be here today and with our panel. Yeah, I would say, employers as a whole have really started to transform some of their focus. We've observed to a more whole health focus, including mental health. And, when we're thinking about workplace culture, how do we integrate that healthcare piece into that? And underpinning that is really, digital solutions that enable this and to address those issues, but also to help kind of this other emerging problem that's happening of attracting and retaining employees and giving forward-looking solutions. From our point of view, as TELUS Health on our virtual care platforms and just in the industry in general, we've seen a significant uptake in the adoption of virtual care throughout this timeline. Like it's shot up. And, we're also kind of getting that anecdotal and survey feedback as well, that employees are actually excited to see this as part of their benefit plan. So, I think the market was starting to move there anyway, and we saw COVID kind of really accelerate that.
Well, Jason, what you said prompted me. I think the pandemic accelerated a lot of trends that were happening. So virtual healthcare would be no exception to that. I think, I don't know if you've seen it, but with our employees, they seem a lot more comfortable with virtual health, just like we're all more comfortable with Zoom than we were 2 years ago. I think we're more comfortable with virtual health and, being more self-directed and informing ourselves and playing a more active role in our health. So I don't know if you've seen that as well, Jason.
Yeah, I think we're seeing kind of this empowerment where it's not just the comfort, but it's like, I want to be a little more in control and on my terms, as everything else is kind of on demand. Healthcare is kind of turning into that. Some of these benefit offerings are turning into that as well.
Thank you, guys. Norm, what effects have advancements in virtual health had on your specific workplace? For instance, how have remote work mandates and the pandemic in general affected your workers' health and overall benefits usage?
That's a big question that might take the rest of the panel, but when I think about it, at Cadillac Fairview, just like many organizations, we've never focused more on employee well-being than during this pandemic. So for us, well-being, just as a definition, it includes physical, mental, social, financial well-being. So we've really focused on all of these things. Like I never thought as a company, it would be our job to provide coaching to our employees on how to homeschool their kids, right? But that's what the pandemic brought us. So we tried to step up and help our people. And it also includes, like Jason was mentioning, virtual health options like medical and paramedical consults, remote coaching and counseling. And people are a lot more comfortable with these during the pandemic. And that's a good thing that will continue post-pandemic, if there is such a thing. It is coming. And like we just said, employees are willing to step up and take a more active role in their health and well-being. I mean, on the benefit, to your question on the benefits usage side, the context for us is CF is somewhat unique because we provide the exact same benefits coverage to every employee, whether you're a security guard, a receptionist, or the CEO. We have the same program for everyone, so that's a bit unique, I would say, in the marketplace. But when we thought about traditional health and dental benefits, that kind of thing, we actually saw a drop in usage during the pandemic. Now, I don't know if others have seen that, but it's likely a combination of people being preoccupied with a lot of other things, the getting their teeth cleaned and etc., and all the restrictions, right, that restricted your ability to access those services. But we saw a drop. Things like psychological claims, like psychotherapist claims, those actually doubled during the pandemic. So we saw that go up. We monitored our employee and family assistance program stats, and they actually only had a slight uptick. That was a big surprise to us during the pandemic, given what we had heard. However, we did see a notable increase in short-term disability claims. I mean, the last thing I'd say is around measurement. We really boosted our measurement of employee well-being during the pandemic. So we went to anonymous employee pulse checks every 6 to 8 weeks. And that really helped us figure out what meaningful action we should take. And we actually ended up developing an employee well-being index that we'll continue to measure going forward over time, so we can see where we stand over time. And it's become a really important aspect of our employee experience. So, we've been able to see where well-being has declined and where there's gaps in employee experience between groups, like between functions, between regions, between our hourly and salaried population. So we can really be much better in targeting our actions and taking meaningful action.
Norm, we had much of the same here at FleetCor, where we saw the traditional benefits usage drop early on in the pandemic, that as certain doctors started to add on a virtual piece, the usage went back up. Unlike your experience, though, our employee assistance programs in every region were inundated with calls from our employees, and we actually crashed one of the systems because they couldn't handle the calls. And again, similar to your experience, we had a big spike in people taking stress leave, just trying to deal with working remotely, dealing with homeschooling children, the demands of work, etc. And I'll discuss a little later, but we added some flexibility to try to help with that. We too have put well-being elements into our employee survey and are now indexing that to see how we're doing. So glad to hear that we're on the same track as some other companies, and we're not alone out there.
Norm and Crystal, those are, those statistics somewhat surprise me, but I understand as well from your reasoning. Could both of you just share potentially how many employees you have at your workplace?
Yeah, so we have around 3,500 employees. So they're spread out. I think we're a little bit like FleetCor from what I know of the company, but they're spread out. So we have employees in Canada, the US, South America, Europe, and a bit in Asia. So we're headquartered in Toronto, but we have a 3,500 employees that are kind of dispersed.
We have the same dispersion. We have about 10,000 employees, but and we're headquartered here in the States in Atlanta, Georgia, but same Canada, US, Mexico, Brazil, Europe, parts of Asia.
I'll just say, Crystal, I drove through Atlanta on the way. I'm in Florida right now because part of my well-being was when they locked everything down in Ontario, we headed to Florida. Just to,
Good idea.
For our own mental health and well-being.
Yep, good idea.
Thank you both. I do think that sets the table for a really interesting conversation here. So let's move on to some other topics. As employers reimagine workplaces, benefits plans, and the importance of employee health in the post-COVID world, whatever that looks like, providing employees with access to modernized healthcare could be the preventative medicine needed to help keep employees and businesses healthy. Jason, what considerations have you made when implementing benefits for staff who are either primarily or frequently remote? Are there differences when compared to a traditional plan?
Yeah, in this context, you know, we're seeing we have implemented flex benefits, first of all. And I think we're seeing the emergence of that as well. And, you know, this idea of allowing employees to really kind of prioritize what's important to them within that benefit plan, whether it be mental health needs or physical health needs or other kind of work from home or work remote accommodations. And within those kind of packages, you know, the opportunity to have a broad array of services that are available to them that function in a real kind of, again, the way we're starting to expect things, right? We're not comparing, you know, like when we think about Spotify, it's really easy. And so we're not, when you're thinking about healthcare and healthcare solutions and benefit plans, they're not being compared really to hospitals. They're being compared to Spotify, the experiences we see elsewhere. So, you know, we really want to make sure that these on-demand solutions, whether it be for acute care or mental health support, allow for kind of really, you know, elegant health and wellness opportunities and empower patients and employees, like we would call them patients, but employees, you know, through more choice, more control, and more ways to stay healthy that kind of fit on their terms.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, the comment about flex is really interesting. But have you seen a large shift in terms of the modernization of benefits as well? I feel like you've touched on that.
There's different attitudes coming out. I think flex benefits is one that's important in terms of empowering the employee at the benefit selection stage, but also the advancement of healthcare spending accounts. So again, to further allow that customization, you know, within the benefit plan. But I think the other thing that's interesting is there's more base offerings now than ever before. Like, you know, virtual healthcare is starting to become kind of an integrated part of the benefit plan, not even something you have to flex into, because those expectations are like, this is kind of the norm now. We're all at home. You know, this makes total sense to continue offering. Again, coming back to that retention and, you know, continuing to hire and keep up with all the other employers out there.
I'd love to turn to the legal aspects here now and touch on it. So Brittany, when it comes to shifting employee agreements to reflect new look hybrid benefits packages, what advice would you share with employers? Are these types of changes easily achieved, or are there possibilities they may be viewed as constructive dismissal?
A great question, and I think one that's on a lot of employers' minds as they're looking at all of the changes that have occurred over the last 2 years. I think it's really important to keep in mind what constitutes a constructive dismissal, right? So this is something that is a unilateral and substantial change to a fundamental term or condition of employment. So of course, when we look at that first criteria, unilateral, the best course of action, the safest course of action is always to get buy-in from your employees. So if an employee is agreeing to the changes, you're avoiding the risk of constructive dismissal entirely because the change is no longer unilateral. One of the first questions that you probably want to ask is, what do your agreements or policies say with respect to your ability to make changes to your benefits plan? So in other words, have your staff already agreed that there's going to be a certain amount of flexibility with respect to what their benefits package looks like? If not, and if you want to ensure that employee morale is maintained, that's when you might want to make sure that any changes that you are implementing are beneficial and helpful for employees, given the changes to the work environment. And seeking employee input can be key to that. So speaking with your employees, figuring out what it is that they're looking for, what they want to see in their benefits package, can be a really great way to avoid this risk of constructive dismissal. The other question, of course, is, are these changes substantial? Are you replacing one benefit with another with relatively equal value, or are you revamping your entire benefit plan in a way that's going to result in a significant loss to your staff? If you find yourself in a situation where the answer is yes, and you do need to make a unilateral change, then you may be able to still insulate yourself against liability by providing advance notice that the changes are coming into effect. Now, what's important to understand about this is that essentially what you are doing is you're providing notice that the old terms of the relationship are coming to an end. So it's very similar to as if you were giving somebody notice of termination, because that's kind of what you were doing. You were saying the old relationship will not exist anymore. Here are the terms of the new relationship. Now, what that means practically is that the amount of notice that's going to be needed is potentially going to be different for every single employee, but also could be very significant, right? We know that notice periods can go up to 24 months as kind of an informal cap. So that can be a really long period of time to be worried about whether there's a potential constructive dismissal claim, and to wait to implement these changes when you may need to make them now. So I think, employee buy-in, if you can get an agreement from an employee that, yes, we're comfortable with this, everybody's on board with these changes, that's going to be the safest option, with kind of your fallback being, how can we make sure this isn't going to qualify as a substantial change?
We have historically grown through acquisition, and all the points that you raised are absolutely correct. And we call our acquisitions babies, and we had a COVID baby. So we did an acquisition during COVID and had to think about how to harmonize the benefits into our existing benefits. And rather than, as you said, make that unilateral change, we looked at usage, we looked at both plans to see what was the best of both worlds. We asked employees what was most important, and we came out with a plan that we thought would work for all of our employees, and they all agreed. So it is important to do that front end work to save the back end headache.
Absolutely right, Crystal. And I think it sounds like you had the exact right approach. And I think, aside from the legal consideration of constructive dismissal, you also want to be thinking about employee morale, right? If we're going to be substantially revising a benefits package, even if you don't get a demand letter alleging constructive dismissal, you could have a lot of really unhappy employees. And, going back to the whole issue of retention of staff, particularly in the pandemic, that's not something that you want to be looking at, because you're going to start to lose good people.
Exactly. And the people normally is why we make acquisitions, and we wanted to retain the people. And so here it is, COVID, they're coming to a new company. We're talking about changing their benefits. And as with any acquisition, the potential for their manager to change, the processes to change. So it was, a confluence of events that could have gone very badly.
Right.
Well, I mean, one thing, I don't know, Brittany, if you have a comment on this, but one thing we've struggled with, I mentioned earlier that, just philosophically, our company said, look, we want to give everyone, whether you're a security guard or the CEO, the same kind of benefit program. And then within that, we're trying to be flexible. Then hybrid work shows up, and people that are working hybrid or remotely, they say, well, they want extra stuff. And so we have struggled with that. And extra stuff can look like a whole lot of stuff, from I need a stand-up desk or I can't do this, to, extra time off kind of accommodations, or ergonomic things. Like, have you dealt with it? You have any comments on that? Like, we've just tried to navigate it as best we could, but I can foresee it being an ongoing issue for us.
Absolutely. I think, as both you and Jason had kind of mentioned earlier in the discussion, is mental health issues have really kind of skyrocketed. And the requests for accommodation are coming in fast to employers, and they're struggling to balance that. And of course, employers do have an obligation to accommodate employees who have a job or a protected ground that they're claiming accommodation under. Employers do have an obligation to accommodate up to the point of undue hardship. So somebody who, for example, needs a standing desk, because they have a disability. That's something that the employer is going to have to look into and consider, okay, is this something that we can do without incurring undue hardship? Whereas, somebody who maybe just wants a standing desk, they're in a very different situation, right? That's not a need, that's a want. But when you're trying to look at equality and fairness across a brand, and you're saying we want everybody to be treated the same, I can see how that could really compound into an issue where one person gets a standing desk. Okay, everyone's got to get a standing desk now. The costs can just go up really, really quickly. I think the important thing for all staff to understand, and I think this is a challenge even outside of a pandemic, is making sure that it's clear that equity, it means that some people will be treated differently, because that's the only way to remove barriers for some people in order for everybody to have an equal experience in the workplace, right? So you may not be treated the same, but this person is being treated differently in order to give them access to all of the same experiences that you have as an employee in the workplace.
Norm, we created a group, a council, if you will, comprised of legal, business people, IT people, and HR people to answer that exact question. What are you going to have when you are at home? And what are you going to have when you are in the workplace? And, obviously outside the scope of this call, we have reconfigured many of our spaces to be hoteling because we have way more people who are hybrid. So if you're not in the office full time, you don't get a dedicated space. And so we've said, okay, if you're hybrid, this is what you get at home, and this is what you get when they're in the office. If you're full time in the office, you get more stuff. You get 2 monitors, you get, the ergonomic keyboard and all that stuff. But if you're hybrid, there's a keyboard at the desk, and that's the one that you use when you jack into the equipment. But it took the whole committee of this cross-functional team about a month to figure out. And to Brittany's point about the standing desks or any other type of chair, because we've had some people who have to have their feet elevated, etc. If they have some sort of proof of the disability, we will purchase whatever it is that they need. But it's not just because you want it and it's nice. And the standing desks are nice.
They are nice. And I think that's the other important thing too, is that even somebody who has a disability and is able to demonstrate that they have restrictions and limitations, they're not entitled to the accommodation of their choice, right? It's up to the employer to determine, how do we deal with these restrictions and limitations in the workplace? So, if an employee sends you a link to the most expensive standing desk and says, this is the only one that's going to work for me, they're not entitled to do that. They may need a standing desk, but it's up to you to determine, okay, how do we make that work?
I'll just jump in here and say, I miss my standing desk. No, really interesting conversation, guys. That's exactly some of the practical real life issues that we're facing, right? So I really appreciate you sharing. And Crystal, I do want to kind of drill down into your company's experience a little further. What types of changes have you seen with benefits at your organization through COVID-19? And are there any best practices that you're able to identify from that experience?
Yeah, our biggest change would be with respect to mental health. We expanded our mental health benefits during this year's design period to be effective January 1st, because again, we had so many people going out on stress leave. And, if you read the literature, study after study has said that, 20% of people are likely to have some sort of mental health issue in this year, which is up a lot. So the things that we have implemented are one, flexible working, and that doesn't mean hybrid working or working remotely. It means flexible working. So if you have to get your children off to school or homeschool or whatever it is, during certain hours, that's fine. If you want to take those hours and put them toward the end of the day, that's fine. So the flexible means it's not 9 to 5 anymore. It can be any time during the day that you do to get your work done. The second thing that we did is we have created things that we used to have in person, we've made them virtual. So in many of our locations, we have had instructors come in and do fitness classes either during lunchtime or at the end of the day or early in the morning. And we've switched those to virtual. So someone's on the Zoom and everybody else is on the Zoom going along with the classes. And we also have kind of what we call Motivation Mondays, also via Zoom now, where people practice meditation. They talk about the different tools that they personally use to calm down, the breathing techniques, etc. We also have routine reminders going out over our intranet and other communication tools like Slack, etc., to remind people about, these are the 5 things you can do to help with your mental well-being, and mental and physical well-being, oh, by the way. And a lot of people are taking part in these, as well as seeing therapists. Again, that mental health usage has increased so much during the pandemic. So if others have other ideas that we can implement, we are all ears.
One thing I loved about what you said, Crystal, is when you talked about virtual work, right, and flexible work. We had quite a journey to go through to land on a flexible work approach, and we had to figure out, what do we stand for, what is value, what do we value in this company, and oh, by the way, we want to create some kind of policy and guidelines that are inclusive of the whole organization. I think everyone got caught up in, the poor people that have to work from home, right? And meanwhile, we have a big percentage of our population that have to show up at work every day on the front lines, and they experienced some significant challenges, right? And they were deserving of flexibility as well. So we took the time to create an inclusive, flexible work program. So the fact that you said it that way, I think is really, really important. And yes, I know we're talking about virtual healthcare and benefits, but it is, the time that you spend at work and how you do it, and when you're away from work, is a big part of that, I think.
One of the interesting things that TELUS has put forward, some of it started just before the pandemic as well, but it was timely around the emphasis on mental health. Was one was like, I think it's $5,000 we have toward counseling services that everyone gets as base. So again, making sure everyone knows it's there and accessible, and we give you these benefits, so use them, and last year and going into this year now for the second year, there's a mindfulness app that has been offered to everyone. And 3 years ago, I wasn't into mindfulness, but now I find myself using it and actually preaching it to my team. So, everyone's at various stages of that, but I think it just shows kind of the array of things you could offer that maybe 3 or 4 years ago you weren't thinking about.
Yeah, and I'm not sure who might be able to answer this, but do you guys feel like remote work has been viewed as a benefit in the past? In my opinion, I never viewed it as a traditional benefit, or flex work, for instance, but do you feel like through COVID-19 that has become something standard almost?
Well, particularly if you live and work in Ontario, which has had the most restrictions of any region in North America, you didn't have a choice. Like, people had to work remotely. So it accelerated the notion of remote work and got people a lot more comfortable with it. So I think the benefits of that, if done right, like we took the time to think about what is our philosophy going forward post-pandemic around flexible work. I think they're tremendous. And I think it leads to more inclusion in the workplace when we think about maintaining our pipeline of females in the talent pipeline, and more diverse inclusion of diversity in our talent group. I think it's going to help a lot. It remains to be seen exactly, because we're still in the pandemic, but we can really foresee this being not only a benefit to employees, but a benefit to the company in terms of the talent that we can attract and retain.
Yeah, Norm, I just on a really personal level, my wife has worked from home before the pandemic and through, and she would have it no other way now. Like it's just kind of the norm for her. She's not in the job market looking or anything, but like it's turned into that standard almost, the baselining of expectations.
Probably as long as you go back to the office, Jason.
Fair enough, yes.
That is true. It is becoming standard. You know, pre-pandemic, we're fairly traditional. So pre-pandemic, if you wanted to have, you know, a leadership role here at FleetCor, we would want you to relocate to one of our major hubs. And now candidates are pushing back and saying, no, 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 I live here and here is where I will be. So if you would like to recruit me, I will need to be here and I will come to you as needed, but I'm not moving there full time. So this hybrid thing and the remote thing is here to stay for sure, for sure.
All right. Let's turn to something slightly different here in terms of, I want to touch on virtual pharmacies in this discussion. So let me preempt by saying, as COVID-19 restrictions begin to recede slightly in some areas and employees begin returning to the office, health opportunities such as virtual pharmacies should continue to be a well-used option within Canada's healthcare system. And Jason, what role do you see virtual pharmacies playing in the world of work going forward? Like what real life benefits can be experienced by both employers and employees through the presence of virtual pharmacies as a viable option?
So I guess to take a step back here, you know, maybe just, you know, the question was in the world of work. I would just talk about in the world first. You know, if we look to the US, you know, we're seeing data that shows a dramatic comfort with receiving kind of medications to your door, but care delivered virtually. And, you know, it's somewhere between 15 and 20%. So, you know, in Canada, the attitudes are a little bit different and we're a little bit slower on the uptake for sure. But I think what we're seeing as I don't want to call it an accelerant, but kind of an opportunity is as the comfort with that digital care piece takes hold, and we've kind of talked about that through this conversation, and the rising attitudes around just convenience and things on my terms and having them delivered to the home where I am working anyway, it starts to become a little more obvious. And then as you start to think about the opportunities for digital integration, where it's not just the pharmacy, it's the pharmacy tacked onto the virtual care. So, you know, you're at the office or you're at home and you're, you know, meeting with a nurse practitioner or a clinician, and there's an output from that. That output is a prescription. You know, the experience on a digital level starts to become a little bit more additive and intuitive. And so we see, you know, there's some opportunity there. And, you know, when we look at other markets, we see that potential being realized. You know, from our point of view, we also see they do a real great job of convenience and ease of use and helping to empower patients to really better understand their therapies. Today, if you ask most people what medications they're on, they probably don't know, or it's probably in a list in their wallet or purse. And to have that in kind of a more centralized location, have an opportunity to actually have control over that profile, and no more need to kind of have I don't want to call it an incoherent conversation, but a disconnected conversation with the doctor or pharmacist or nurse practitioner. You know, when you're saying, they're asking what medications you're on, and it's like, I'm on a white oval pill that says 10 on it. Like, that's not ideal. And that's not ideal for healthcare. That's not ideal for a good conversation around health. So, you know, we see this as, you know, creating that experience that, you know, once you have it, you're like, why didn't I always have this?
Jason, you mentioned that you think that people in the United States are ahead of people in Canada with using kind of telehealth. Do you think it's also generational, that the younger?
I think there's a couple of things. I think one, it's, you know, there's regulations that have supported it a little bit differently in the United States than in Canada. But I do think that we are seeing kind of niche players come out that really focus on kind of younger demographics, and, you know, through birth control and erectile dysfunction and, well, lifestyle type medications that are really, you know, indexing toward that population. I think when we're looking at it, we're also seeing that interestingly, on the kind of more, there's a sweet spot though, right, that we can play into. And so we're trying to say, how do we work within that for sure.
Crystal, you've mentioned this, you touched on this already, but I wanna talk about strategies in terms of communications around this. So my question for you is, what strategies would you suggest for communicating the value of benefits plans to remote workers? Obviously, this is critical in getting a good return on investment, reducing turnover, and driving productivity. What are your thoughts here?
Communicating to employees and having them understand, because communication is not just talking at people, it's also having the message received, is incredibly important, you know, especially as we continue on with the war for talent. You know, again, if you look at studies, about half the people don't understand their benefits, and about 80% of the people never read any communications about their benefits. So how do we combat that? What we've tried to do is, first of all, don't leave it to the benefits/HR practitioners. Get people who message for a living, i.e. marketing, internal communications involved to make everything sound good, understandable, look pretty, and catches your eye. So stale, boring, you know, documents that go through the legalities of everything is not the way to go at all. Death by PowerPoint is also not the way to go. It's small bits of pieces of information that are in nice infographics in bite-sized pieces that the employees can digest is the way we've chosen to go and had some success with it. We also try multiple channels. So we have webinars, we have small group Q&A sessions, we post things on Slack, the intranet, etc. We also try to not have communication all be at one time of the year during open enrollment. So I know open enrollment works differently in different geographies, and some geographies don't even have an open enrollment, but we try to go throughout the year to say, here are the things, have you thought about using this benefit? And then, you know, toward the latter half of the year, the back half of the year, we remind people to use their flexible spending money so that they don't lose them, etc. So, and the other thing we do is we force our leaders in their town hall sessions to also give a few sound bites about what's happening from a benefits point of view. And again, the communication is also two-way. I mentioned earlier that in our surveys, we're asking questions about the benefits and well-being and using that to drive decision-making when it comes to designing what we're going to do for the next year.
You bring to mind, Crystal, a couple of practical things for us. Yeah, we do a lot of the omni-channel communication. One thing that seems to, it's old school, but it works, is total reward statements. We issue them every year and remind people about the value of what they've received. And every year people are like, oh my God, I didn't realize that was worth so much. I didn't realize I had that. So it seems to work, right? People, I think, like to take stock of where they are. So they see how much, you know, money they got, but also what the benefits were. And we include things like, you know, in our major cities, like parking costs. They're like, I didn't realize that I got a $4,000 benefit on parking this year, right? Like it's meaningful. But I know we're talking about virtual health here, but it includes, you know, all our healthcare as well. The other thing that we did, which is just a practical thing, is we have now consolidated all the places you really need to go you go through one click, right? You don't have to go to multiple websites or sources or links. So one example is we combine all of our you know, health and dental and wellness benefit landing page with our pension page. So I talked about earlier, well-being being physical, mental, social, financial. A lot of people, like, they have to go into the benefits page to submit their benefits, but because the pension page is right there, like they just have to click on it. It led, as soon as we did that, it led to a 43% increase in people going to check out how much pension they had and go in and then figure out there's tools in there to help them with their financial picture. So it's just, you know, removing the friction for people it immediately paid off. So a couple practical thoughts.
This has been great to hear and understand from a different perspective. I think from what we do here is we have an onboarding checklist in addition to all the good stuff you guys have kind of articulated. And I think it's interesting in this onboarding checklist, we have making sure you as the hiring manager explain the benefit package. So it's one extra touch point, and it's not just explain, it's really, it's there to use. It's there to make sure, open door to ask questions. Like, we don't want this to be something that you should be embarrassed talking about or asking about. How do I optimize my RSPs, or how do I log on to this virtual meditation app that I have, or whatever, so we're really trying to bridge that from the marketing aspect and the enrollment and into the onboarding as well.
I think that's a really, really, really good point. I know one of the trends that we see with everybody being so busy is the whole, this meeting could have been an email thing. But the important thing, though, is that employees do need an opportunity to ask questions. So when you give them that environment, whether it's a town hall, whether it's a one-on-one meeting where they can ask questions and actually discuss the benefits, you're going to have employees with a better understanding of what you're offering, as opposed to just sending out an email blast or a newsletter or something like that. That's really just a one-way communication.
The other add-on to that is whenever we've tried to include the spouses of our employees, it's gone much better. Somehow when your spouse gets involved, it spurs you on to more action. There's probably a study about that somewhere, but it's held true for us.
Why do I feel like you're looking at me here, Nora?
No judgment. No judgment.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, it's been a great conversation thus far. We do have a couple more questions to go, but yeah, I really appreciate all of the insights. I do feel like through something like a global pandemic, that benefits packages become, much more valued and used throughout. So thank you. Turning back to hybrid workplaces. With hybrid workplaces as the new norm, the world of work is expected to shift in many ways, with office workers able to work from anywhere. Employers may need to consider more personalized and flexible workplace benefit plans that allow for choice, and we've discussed this. Norm, telehealth is one opportunity for employers to reduce benefits costs. How should leaders also ensure that changes to benefits programs are leveraged appropriately for recruitment and retention purposes?
Yeah, it's a really important question. Every time you say the new norm, I always think my kids call me the old norm. So we're getting both on this call. Benefit costs are one of those things that are increasing materially every year. Our benchmarks last year in the industry were that the costs went up on average 9%, right? So this is like managing the cost is a very important thing. So I don't want to skip over that. That being said, we chose to increase our costs knowingly because we believe there were some worthwhile trade-offs. I had mentioned before about how we had doubled our paramedical claims around psychologists and psychotherapists. So we ended up tripling our maximum coverage because we knew that that was a valued benefit. Something that many companies have done, but we now have 4 well-being days in addition to regular holidays, and those are super well used. We boosted our healthcare and fitness spending accounts, and even just temporary things around COVID, increasing the paid time off for illness and for vaccination. Those are all costs that we consciously increased because we felt there was a valuable trade-off. So that being said, I think going forward, there's no doubt that employers are going to need to consider flexible benefit plans in the sense that employees are, like we talked about, more informed. They're willing to take self-directed action. They want increased customization or personalization. It's going to be an important part of the employee experience, like right through the employee life cycle, right? And there's a big role for HR to play there, along with benefit providers to kind of think that through of how to add that value. It is, as you mentioned in your question, it's going to be a big part about attracting and retaining the right kinds of what I'd say diverse talent in companies. We touched on it before, but getting people from different backgrounds, different geographies, keeping females engaged in the talent pipeline with different work arrangements, and retaining older workers. There's lots of discussion about the skills shortages and needing to retain older workers in the workforce longer, not the least of which is many of them can't retire when they thought they could. So, how are you managing your plans to accommodate those multiple generations? And then the last thing I would say is we spend a lot of time thinking about having an inclusive workplace and adapting to the diversity of our workforce. And I think, healthcare and benefit programs are going to be a big part of that. We need to consider how we adapt those programs for remote work, for various family arrangements, and the multi-generational workforce. It's the largest multi-generational workforce in history. How do we adapt our programs to accommodate that and attract and retain that diverse talent?
Do you think, going back to Crystal's point, that the measurement of the employee satisfaction with this plays a role in kind of understanding where you go and where you index on your side, Norm?
Well, it's huge. We have boosted our measurement, but it's also the intersectionality of measurement. So something that we've gotten much deeper into. I talked about earlier how we're measuring well-being. We also measure inclusion, and we also measure engagement. So what we have, and then we compare those with employee experience. So what we've found is there's a really strong statistical correlation between engagement, inclusion, and well-being, really strong. And so that if you work on well-being, it helps your engagement. If you work on inclusion, it helps your well-being. You might intuitively know that, but our data actually proves that there's a strong statistical correlation. So then we take that data and compare it with employee experience data, and we can see where there are certain groups that are not having a comparable experience to other groups. Some of it they could be marginalized groups that you might think of, but we also saw a big difference between our hourly and our salary group. And we're like, oh, we need to take action there. So I think the measurement and the ability to measure is really important to us, and I think it should be to most people. So you're taking the right kinds of targeted, meaningful action in this space. A great point, Jason.
The only other thing that I'll throw in there is social connection. That's one of our measurements as well. And we have found that people have lost some of that social connection during the pandemic, which has driven down some of our engagement in certain regions. And so we're trying to make sure that we actively work on that as well, because it's attached to well-being and all the other things that go with it that Norm, you just mentioned.
Really good point.
Thank you, guys. This final question I will pitch to Brittany, but it's really for all of you. From your perspective, and to wrap up this discussion, what high-level adjustments and practical considerations should employers make to benefits plans as the shift continues towards hybrid workplaces?
I think from a practical perspective, employers need to be considering what employees actually need in light of their new working circumstances. Some things are probably not going to change. Employees are still going to want health benefits. They're still going to need that. But maybe having a, gym membership reimbursement program doesn't make sense in an environment where gyms have been closed off and on for almost a year. I think, the word of the day that we've all been using is flexibility, right? I think, having something that allows choice to employees in terms of putting their benefits to use where they need it. So having a healthcare spending account where they can determine how to use that to best assist them and their needs. Or even using the gym membership example that I just talked about, allowing employees to apply this to purchasing equipment for a home gym or subscribing to a fitness app. Just recognizing that the circumstances are different and making adjustments to accommodate that. I think the other reality that has also been mentioned by everyone on this meeting or call today is the focus on mental health and providing appropriate supports for that. This has been and will continue to be a very challenging time for staff. Having a robust employee assistance program, access to mindfulness resources, and making sure that your employees know about these resources and how to use them and how they can assist them. I think those are just the new reality of what we're looking at right now.
You did say it's for everyone, so maybe I'll jump in. I'll just go back to the point that we talked about is, how are you listening to employees and getting data to know what to do? Because resources are finite, right? There's lots of great ideas out there. I mean, I don't know how your companies work, but a lot of times it's, 4 or 5 people sitting around a boardroom table at head office to go, yeah, we should put this benefit in. I think it's a good idea. Have you really listened to your employees? Do you know what's valuable to them? When you make all those series of trade-offs, what data are you using to make those trade-offs to make the best decision? So that's my practical thing is, measuring and listening.
I think that's a really great point, Norm. And one of the questions that I get frequently is, I'm a startup, I'm a small business. Like, how do I do this? I don't have the resources to do this. And that's where I usually do direct them back to that flexibility piece of, if you don't know what your employees need, I mean, first of all, you should probably start asking them. But if you really are in the beginning stages and you're not sure what to do, think about something like a healthcare spending account where they have the flexibility to choose for themselves what benefits are going to be appropriate for them.
Thanks, guys. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I do feel like this conversation in its entirety has given lots of practical opportunities for employers. So thank you so much. To conclude, I just want to thank each of you for your contributions to this important conversation. Talent Canada will continue to monitor the Work Reimagined discussion in the coming weeks and months at talentcanada.ca. Thanks again for joining us, and all the very best.